Alrighty, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here this evening. So if you could find a seat, that would be fantastic. Well, welcome everybody, those who are in the room and those tuning in online as well. My name is John Henderson. I'm the Digital Ministry Director here at Milford First United Methodist Church. I'm really excited to see all of you in the room. We have a really good group here tonight, and I know I already checked in. I saw a couple people already tuning in online, so we're trying to do more of these hybrid events here at the church. This is the first of our community conversations. We're kicking it off during Mental Health Month with a very important topic tonight. I'm really excited for the panelists here next to me, their experience, both professional and personal, that they'll bring tonight. So settle in. We have about an hour here together. We will do about 45 to 50 minutes of back and forth conversation between us up here, and then we will open up the floor to any questions that you might have and to any questions that come through online as well. So as you know, millions of people in the United States are affected by mental illness every year. This is a huge topic, not just in this community here in Milford or in greater Cincinnati, but across our nation. For people of all ages, mental health has reached a tipping point over the past few years as we've grappled with the realities of a changing world and a global pandemic. Here at Milford First, we strive to be a church where all people are seen, heard, and belong. We're committed to providing space for those within our community so that no one has to face life's struggles alone. So that is why we are here tonight. I'm joined, as I said, by an awesome panel here of leaders from our community and around the greater Cincinnati region, someone from Milford Schools, from NAMI, from Child Focus. We have a deacon in the United Methodist Church and a licensed professional pastoral counselor with us. So, but I don't want to do their introductions. I want to turn over the stage to them. So Melanie, go ahead and kick us off. Tell us who you are and kind of how you got involved with mental health, why it matters, why you're here tonight.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having us. My name is Melanie Palmer. I'm the training officer at Child Focus. I've actually been in the mental health field about 29 years. I have a license in marriage and family therapy, and I practice in Ohio. I'm a transplant from California, but I've been in Ohio now 15 years. Working at Child Focus the last 15 years. Excellent place to work, and we're hiring, and certainly a place for resources and support as well. Like I said, I've been in the field about 28 years, but even my experiences as a child and growing up in California where I did, just my own personal family life, friends, family things I've experienced kind of led me into the mental health field, and I can probably just leave it at that.
I'm Will Cates. I'm the mental health coordinator with Milford Exempted Village School District. I've been in the mental health field it'll be 16 years in June. I started when I was 19 years old working at a private practice, just doing billing and insurance while I was in school for criminal justice. I really wanted to be a police officer and just really fell in love with clinical mental health and psychology. My background is really originally working in forensic mental health, then working in school-based mental health with kids, and then working in crisis. I was a mobile crisis responder for Claremont County for several years, and now have been with Milford Schools for about 4.5 years. So I'm very passionate about mental health. I can talk about it all day, all night. It's honestly, to me, it's outside of maybe physics or space travel, probably the most interesting thing you can talk about. So I'm very glad to be here tonight and glad to be a part of this community discussion. So thank you.
I'm Reverend Stephanie Tunison. I have a master's degree in counseling from the University of Cincinnati. I am a licensed professional clinical counselor, which is an independent license, so I can diagnose and treat and work with folks independently. I'm also certified as a clinical trauma professional, and am also certified in integrative nutrition for mental health professionals, because nutrition is an important part of our mood, actually. My undergrad was in special ed, and I was going through a divorce, and I needed to figure out how, as a Christian woman, was I going to divorce when I didn't think I had biblical grounds. And I went to a pastoral counselor who guided me through that process and would not give me an answer of what I should do until I could get there myself, which was a great gift to me. I decided when I had to go back to work that I wanted to give back what I had gained in my counseling experience. So I went and got my master's and got my independent license. I've been counseling for almost 30 years, and I absolutely love integrating spirituality with psychotherapy, and have found recently that with the new science on trauma that as I look back, I'm going, wow, I missed some things with some of my folks, because with the new information, I just feel so much more empowered to share information with them and walk that journey with my clients. So I'm in private practice in Kenwood.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Dave Slusher, and I was in the sales field for over 40 years, natural and organic food, so I love listening to this young lady talk about how important nutrition and hydration is to mental health, and it truly is. So for those 40 years, I was involved with it, and it brought me closer and closer to what nutrition did for mental health. And because of that, within the family dynamic that we had, we'd experienced mental illness throughout our family. Like Stephanie, I wanted to do more. I knew that I wanted to do more. So in 2016, God tugged on my heart to become a family-to-family counselor for NAMI, incredible organization, National Alliance for Mental Illness. They do a lot of great things for a lot of different communities, up to and including schools. So I can't wait until Milford comes on board next year. But, you know, I've been doing it now for, like I said, since 2016, been blessed enough to be able to co-teach with this young lady sitting to my right. And we've probably touched 300 lives, 300 families, 300 folks that thought coming into this they were alone. So thank you all for being here. This is so important to not just us, but so important to the young folks coming up. So for that, I thank you, and I hope you get something out of this tonight.
My name is Becky Kearns, and I am a special education supervisor for Claremont County. I spent, 25 years teaching kids that have been diagnosed or labeled as having an emotional disturbance. Now I supervise special ed classrooms. I started focusing more on mental health with my twins, who are identified with schizophrenia. So I have schizophrenic twins, and began working in NAMI. I teach a whole bunch of classes for them. I work with Dave, obviously, but that's become my focus, both professionally and personally, to try to work through some of those issues. I also have a huge interest in trauma, so I was happy to hear that, but that's kind of who I am.
Awesome. Thank you all. So before we jump into questions tonight, I have a few housekeeping things, both for all of you in the room and then for those viewing online. That's the beauty of this hybrid format, is that we have people here in Milford, but we could reach with tonight's event people around the world. So that's what is really exciting to me about this conversation, is that it is a conversation that touches not just us in this room, but people from all over. So for those of you here, if you didn't pick up any refreshments, there are refreshments over there, some drinks, some pop, and some water, as well as some snacks on the table. And then as you leave tonight, there are resources from each of the organizations on the table by the doors. So please do pick those up as you leave tonight. Later this week, I will also post on our Milford First social media pages and our website resources from each of these organizations and individuals. So do look for that information coming out on our social media and our website later this week. And again, we're going to do about 45 minutes of some questions here, some back and forth conversation, and then at the end, I'll leave about 10 minutes for questions from the room. And then if you are viewing us online, please do put your questions in the comments feed on Facebook. If you're viewing us on YouTube or on our website, if you want to ask a question, you're going to need to hop over to our Facebook page and post it there. And then we will take questions from both our online viewers and those of you in the room later on this evening. Alrighty, so what we're going to do is we're going to start broad with some definitions, just some basic understanding of what is mental health, and then we will narrow from there and end up at some actionable steps at the end of tonight's conversation. So the first question that I want to start off with tonight, because I know there are misconceptions out there, I know this is something that, because we have not talked about it, because there is a stigma behind it, there is confusion around terms and what does this mean? What is mental health? And what is the difference between mental health and mental illness? I think, Melanie, let's start with you, and then anybody else that wants to chime in, please do.
So overall, when I think about mental wellness and mental health, I think about those terms actually interchangeably. And so when you're thinking about mental health, really we are thinking about the whole mind, body, integrative, holistic experience, because our mental health, our mental wellness is impacted not only by our thoughts, but our experiences and our beliefs about our experiences and our thoughts about our experiences and who we're interacting with and what we've experienced, like all of our lived experiences up till now, and how our brains developed. And there's just so much to it as far as what we, think about it and how we understand it. And so if we think about mental wellness and mental health, we actually do need to think about relationships, health, nutrition, thinking, beliefs, spirituality. All these things are going to play into how we, what our lens is. And whatever our lens is and what we are experiencing impacts us, and impacts us in a way that then could cause us distress, depending on our lens, depending on our lived experience. And then you have biology, you have physiology. But, I want people to understand that regardless of your genetic makeup, how things are, like eye color. We tend to think of mental health and mental illness as genetic, and we're very tied to the medical model, and that's fine and it has its place, but we really want to be open up to, like I said, the holistic kind of integrative experience and how all of these things do impact our overall mental wellness, and then how we interpret it, what our lens is, and how we're impacted by it. So it's not just our biology, it's not just our physiology, it's the environment, it's the people around us, and the things that are happening that will impact us. And it could be also, too, related to, it could be a very specific stressor that happens. So someone could have really great support, a great environment, a great upbringing, but maybe something occurs that's a major stressor, a major event, and that could cause what we would call an emotional injury or something like that. So I think I'm speaking a lot, but I want people to kind of be more broad and open about how we identify it, because I think historically we have a very conditioned idea about mental illness, and we tend to think about it it's genetic, and it's if my parents and my grandparents had depression, well then I'm predisposed to it. Well, I think there's some truth to that, but we want to really look at how we can be empowered by all the things that we can do to combat that, to also increase our resilience and our overall wellness and what that looks like. Because I think, like I said, historically, we spent a lot of time on we call the medical model, and define it in certain terms. We have labels, we certainly have diagnosis. You can look at the DSM-5 TR, and we won't get into that. But that's how people get labeled and diagnosed, but there's so much more to it as far as that. I like to focus on the mental wellness of it and how we can be empowered. Does that answer you?
Yes, that's perfect, and I want to follow up to that, but I want to let anybody else chime in.
Yeah, I'd like to just add, just as we have, and I agree with everything you just said, but just as we have physical health, we also have physical illness, but we have mental health and we have mental illness. And kind of the demarcation is when we're not functioning as well in our day-to-day life, that we're realizing something's not quite right with me right now, and it's been going on a little too long. And so maybe since I'm not functioning, I'm more tearful, or I'm not concentrating, or I'm just really struggling, or maybe a friend or a family member says, have you thought about talking to someone? That's that line between. To your point about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental and Emotional Disorders, and version 5, it's as thick as your Bible, okay? And at some point in our lifetime, we will all probably have some kind of issue in that diagnostic text. But that doesn't mean that we are mentally ill, lock us away, throw away the key. It means we're normal, natural folks who just meet a challenge that's been too much for us, and we just need a little help to kind of get over that difficult period. So,
Thank you. Anybody else? Will?
Yeah, and just to dovetail on that, so I really like what both of these ladies said. To me, just for further differentiation, when people say mental illness, I think very specifically of behavioral health diagnoses. And as you shared, the DSM-5, it is like this thick, and everything from caffeine use disorder or caffeine dependence all the way to a schizoaffective disorder and very complex personality disorders are in that book. So at some point, we're all going to hit something in there, sometimes multiple things. And as Melanie had said, there's very much environmental influences that can sometimes bring about the onset of things we might be genetically predisposed to. So mental health is very much this broad spectrum of things, and we all have mental health, but mental illness to me is very specifically an acute dysfunction or episode of dysregulation that we experience as it relates to our mental health.
Thank you all. I think I want to go back and touch on a point that Melanie, you were talking about mental wellness. We also use terms like mental health and mental illness. Thank you to the both of you, all three of you, for responding and differentiating between those three. Let's think a little bit more about those misconceptions and the how we define this, and maybe some of the generational gaps or cultural gaps that might exist. So let's talk a little bit more about those misconceptions. So whether it be generational or cultural or whatever, what are some common misconceptions that exist here in 2022 about mental health? Anybody can chime in.
I think one thing for me, since I'm around so many young people, sometimes when we call home to talk to parents, there can be some inherent resistance because of the stigma associated with it. And to be clear, working as a school employee, we're not like issuing diagnoses to children unless parents specifically request that, because most often diagnoses are really just issued for the purposes of billing insurance and Medicaid, and we don't bill insurance and Medicaid. So I think the stigma is definitely a challenge. And can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure.
For me?
So just generally, what are some common misconceptions about mental health?
So that some of it, thank you. So in working with kids, there's, I think, this tendency to also believe that it's kind of trendy, or it's like, oh, well, they're not really depressed, they're just saying that because their friends are, and it's like, well, or perhaps they really are struggling with depression, and these kids have found each other as a result of needing to connect with people who are experiencing things similar to them. And there's also, I think, a lot of misconceptions surrounding like violence and aggression, which is not the case. Even in when I've worked with adults who have very severe psychotic disorders, we're talking about people who are really just struggling to with executive functioning and basic functioning, and are not more prone to violence than anyone else. In fact, many of them were less prone to violence in my experience. So there's a lot of stigma out there, and I think Hollywood and social media plays a huge role in our kind of like societal perception of mental illness.
I couldn't agree more. Hollywood has really hurt us. There are too many movies out there. And the news hurts us as well. I think looking at the sensational as opposed to just caring about folks. I just want to say, too, I think I'll get into a theological discussion with you, but we've just got to get back to God, right? And that God is a God of love, and God is one who cares for us and wants our very best. And so I'll stop there because I know I'll go off. But
Well, actually, I don't know that I want you to stop there, because I was having a conversation with someone recently, Stephanie, in this church, and we were talking about this issue of mental health and how important it is that we talk about this now, because it hasn't been talked about specifically in the Christian context, or if it was talked about, it was talked about in a way as if, if you aren't mentally well, then you aren't praying hard enough, or your Christian faith is not deep enough. Or can you speak a little bit more to that and that shift that may be happening right now?
I concur with you 100%. I think that unfortunately we have had some toxic faith teaching, and people get caught up in dogma, and that you just what you said, you're not praying enough, you're not faithful enough, you're not trusting enough, you're not positive enough, you're not projecting positive images of what you want, and God just doesn't work that way. Our God is a God who loves us and cares for us, and he certainly had trials and struggles in his life. He certainly cared for all the folks in the community he was in and their struggles and their problems, and he was there to heal them and to care for them and to love them. And that's where we need to be with each other and not judge each other, and whether or not you're checking boxes of some theology. And I have perceived as a deacon, because my work has always been outside of the church, to be a bridge between the church and the world, is that so many folks fall away from the church because of feeling hurt by experiences in the church. And I try to remind folks that religion is about people and buildings, and faith is about a relationship with our God, and that we want to forgive the folks and get back to a right relationship with our Lord. So.
Thank you. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Dave.
and I think, when we talk about it inside the NAMI family to family training, one of the things that we talk about when we come together, because folks walk in and they think they're the only one. And then they walk in, they see a group of folks, and by the third week, Becky, we have true friends, folks who care about each other. So back to the point of, we use the term, we get away from Facebook, and we very quickly get into Gracebook, because it's life.
I want to jump back. I'm going off script a little bit here, but Will, to your point about media, both Hollywood, what we see on television, or through streaming services, or in the movies, but also social media. Let's talk a little bit more about that. The shift that may be happening. Social media is great because it is opening us up to conversations, and people are able to share their struggles and what's going on, and we're able to have those conversations in an online space that we weren't able to have before. But it also does a lot of harm as well. So can you talk about both sides of that coin?
Yes. So from one perspective, I think social media can be a really good tool for people who are needing to connect with the world. It's a great way to communicate with others, stay in touch with loved ones, find people who think like we think, who can offer support like we need. And it's always there, right? It's always there. How many people in here have social media on their phones? Right? You can just open your phone anytime and just be connected. I'm the same way. I have multiple social media apps on my phone, so it's always available, and that's a really nice tool to have. Where I think it becomes problematic, and particularly, so two things. I'll talk about young people, and then I'll talk about adults. One thing I think that is problematic for young people, particularly with the advent of Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok. A couple years ago, I had found some research saying that the average Gen Z, so Generation Z, which are now, I think a lot of them are they're 20-ish, early 20s, they were spending on average 4 to 6 hours a day on social media. So if you can imagine being a young person, and your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25 years old, and you're unconsciously comparing yourself to thousands of images and videos of people you want to be like, or what you feel pressure to be like, or to look like, or to sound like, or to act like. 4 to 6 hours a day of that type of exposure to a very young brain can be very detrimental to the development of that person's unique identity, to maybe what their family's beliefs and cultural norms and expectations are for them. So that can be a problem. Instagram, I think, and even Facebook had come out and said that they definitely had research indicating that, the use of these apps over a period of time does appear to be contributing to people experiencing depression. And so beyond that, if you look more on Facebook, where adults, you'll find more adults 30 and over on Facebook versus Instagram. And this is more anecdotal, this is just from my observation. Who all has seen a good Facebook argument? right? We've all seen them. We've all probably participated in them to some degree. So unfortunately, social media, particularly with Facebook, has really contributed to people developing dichotomous thinking, which is that kind of all or nothing thinking. Oh, you're this, then you believe this, and you're one of those people. And it's like, oh, well, you don't believe this, then you hate this group of people, so I can't associate with you. And we just immediately stop, exploring the discussion and taking it further because we have these automatic beliefs about other groups of people based upon a sample of information that they put. A person can put one sentence on social media, and we somehow believe that we know everything about that person and what they think, what they feel, and what they believe. And as adults, we're guilty of that. So social media can really be problematic. And so that kind of overexposure to negative content can really contribute to a pattern of negativistic thinking within ourselves, even as adults.
Great, thank you. Do any of you want to add to that before I move on?
I would just like to add the antidote, which is that personal connection and reaching out to one another, and we sort of were talking about that earlier, and not just relying or having the time management issue when it comes to our loved ones, our relationships, especially as parents, caregivers. It's very tempting to allow the iPad, the phone, to kind of take care when we're so busy and distracted. But that positive social and personal connection with your loved ones, with others, with family, with friends, and just being there for them in a positive, caring, loving way and compassionate way is the antidote to all this. It really is.
I agree 100% with what both of you have said. I just want to encourage folks to oftentimes parents will minimize a child's upset or disappointment or anger or hurt about what somebody has said to them at school or on social media, and parents will just, oh, forget it, don't worry about it. And it's really important for us to really stop and really sit down with them and say, help me understand how you're feeling about this. How are you doing? What's going on? And to let them talk about their feeling angry or hurt or whatever it might be, so that they can get it out, and we can then coach them on how to care about self with anger. That it's okay to be angry, but we don't hurt people and we don't hurt property, and just it's a wonderful time for you to really inculcate your healthy values with your kids in those moments. So just take that extra time to listen to them.
Perfect, thank you. And that ties right into my next couple questions, so I'm going to package these together. And Becky, I think I want to pull you in to kind of kick us off. So what are some common challenges, particularly related to young people, that tend to lead to mental illness and poor mental health? And then let's pull back to what we were just having a conversation about and talk a little bit more about how families can support young people dealing with mental health struggles. Yes, challenges that might be common currently, and then how can families support them in that?
Okay, so I think a lot of kids right now are really lost. They've got no, they were home a lot from COVID, so they have no real social connection. Their parents work a ton, so they have no real family connection. They're being pulled in 800 directions at school, so they feel like they don't really have any kind of grounding in where they are and who they are. And we don't have a social construct that supports that anymore in this country or most neighborhoods. So I think we need to start looking at how to support kids and accept them for who they are and not who we want them to be. And they're not, we're not all going to raise the next LeBron James, and we're not all going to raise the next famous actor and famous actress. And we have to realize that our kids are little human beings, and we have to nurture their hearts and their souls and their personalities and themselves, instead of trying to make them be somebody that they aren't, and that they have real ideas and real feelings and real values, and that's who they are, and we have to accept that for who they are. So
that's huge. Thank you.
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying before, and that's, again, what I love about NAMI, is that conversations like you brought up, Stephanie, of being able to talk about it at home, a lot of it's fear-based. Parents don't know how to talk about it. They don't even know what it is. They're scared of it. You know, in society, we take a look at this, and you brought up mental illness. If I say physical health, what do you think of? Diet, exercise. If I say mental health, what do you think of? Anxiety, depression. But like like Will was saying before, that's truly not the case. So these type of programs, as well as NAMI, as well as what the folks to my left are doing, is truly about education. Education is armor. When parents feel like they have the armor, the education to be able to address their children and know that they're human beings, not human doings, that this is real, that they can talk to them about it. You know, I have a son who suffers from mental illness. And he'll tell me, Dad, I have an illness, but I'm not crazy. Because that's what the world tells all of us. So back to your point, that's where we have to go.
Thank you. So I think we're kind of progressing from what is mental health, what is mental illness, what is mental wellness, to kind of what do we do about it? Dave, you talked about fear. Stephanie, you talked about poor theology, some things that can get in the way of someone trying to seek health. Maybe it's financial. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the barriers that exist, both in your realm, within this community, within Greater Cincinnati, but just generally, what barriers exist for those seeking help?
I have to say insurance companies.
Absolutely.
I just have a lot of thoughts about insurance companies, but one of my greatest concerns is that if a couple wants to come in for counseling, I have to tell them, I'm sorry, you can't use your insurance because insurance companies don't see marital counseling as a medical necessity, so they have to pay out of pocket. And that's just not right. So I can have a sliding scale, which is wonderful, but you know, people shy away. And again, it's because of the medical model, we have to put labels on people. And you want to be careful with those labels because those labels can follow you. And so you want to put the least restrictive kind of diagnosis on someone as an adjustment disorder, which most people have. We all have adjustments to life situations that we do need to get through. And so it's wise to go in for the therapy. And what's important is that you don't have to be in there forever. You're not going to be on a couch. You don't have to tell your whole life story. You talk about what's going on right now, and we want to look at what are your symptoms. Why are you crying? Why can't you concentrate? Why are you afraid? And then we look at what can you do in the next, where do you want to be in 3 months from now or 6 months from now? And maybe I have some folks who just come in 3 or 4 times and they're done. They got what they needed and they're happy to carry on. I have some other folks, yes, that I have worked with for years, but then that's that difference between that mental health and that mental illness. So.
But you also have to find somebody who believes you. So when my kids started showing symptoms in junior high or even late elementary school, it was like, oh, they just want attention. Oh, they must be using drugs and alcohol. Oh, they just need this or that. And we would go to psychiatrist after psychiatrist after psychiatrist who said, don't bring him back because he won't talk to me, or whatever. And it took us until they were 20 years old to get a diagnosis. So we're paying like all of this money and all of this time, and meanwhile my kids are getting sicker and sicker and sicker and less capable of living a life that they need. If I could have had treatment for them when they were 11, you know, they might be in a whole different boat right now. They'd be much healthier and much more well-adjusted than having to wait until they were 21, 20 years old, getting arrested and involuntarily hospitalized. You know, there's a lot of problems around that where people, they find every other excuse in the book for why someone's not acting like they're supposed to be acting.
And to the point on hospitalization, as good as many of our hospitals are here with psychiatric help, sometimes folks who get there isn't always a solid differentiation between those folks who are truly having serious illness and folks who are just going through an adjustment process and are really failing. Crisis, yes, thank you. And so that makes it hard for folks to go in when they do need to go because they're afraid of that population.
So just to kind of dovetail on what you said, where people said, oh, they just want attention. So one thing I try to make super clear to everyone: if a person is feigning mental illness, if a person is pretending to have a mental illness, if a person is pretending to be suicidal, that is just as much of a problem as a person who is actually experiencing those things. And that is because the person is trying to convey that they are really struggling. And if it's manifesting in a way that comes across as dishonest, the reality is they're trying to tell you that they feel unwell and that they are not okay and that they do need help and they do need support. So thank you for sharing that about your own experience.
And one more reframe, because this is one of my things. Because we hear this all the time, especially with youth. They're just doing it for attention.
Right.
One of the things I do in a lot of my trainings, this almost always comes up in some way. So just try to, when you catch that phrase, either in your own mind, because we're all guilty of doing, we're not all our best selves all the time, right? We have stressors, we have things, we're frustrated, we're agitated, we're hungry, we're tired. So when you're thinking that about somebody, or you hear it from somebody else, you want to offer the reframe to yourself first and to that other. They're not doing this for attention, they're seeking connection. They're seeking connection. And it's a very quick adjustment. You just feel it automatically, because when we hear seeking attention, that's negative, right? And exactly to what Will says, there's so many people who've been conditioned and they have learned ways to cope and to survive. And sometimes those ways are very distressful to others, but it's all they know, and it's what that keeps them in balance, and it's their coping. So seeking it, they're just doing it for attention. No, they are seeking connection.
And it's okay, I'm sorry. And it's okay if you're worried that your child might be thinking about suicide or a loved one, it's okay to ask. If you ask them about it, you're not planting the seed for them to do it. You're just inquiring, you're showing your care and your concern. And so you can ask them, are you feeling suicidal? And if they say, well, they maybe had some thoughts, you can ask them further, well, what kind of thoughts? Because what you're looking for is, do they have intention? Do they have a plan? And if they have a plan, can they carry it out? And then how imminent is it? And so if you can discern those things, it makes a huge difference. And most of the time, they're just looking for that connection.
And just one more thing. You don't even have to do all that. You ask the question directly, and then you get a maybe, a tears, a yes, whatever it is. You can then listen, be there, stay with that person, listen. Then you're going to call a community crisis line like 513-528-SAVE, which is a Claremont and Brown crisis line. That person will do that all that screening. You don't even have to do all, I mean, that is all correct, but that can be overwhelming. You get a yes, a maybe, and I don't know. You just listen. That's the most powerful thing you can do. Listening is suicide prevention, by the way. Listening, and then calling a county crisis line, and that person, call with that person. Call them, and they'll ask all those questions right there. And it's so a lot of people think, oh, it's 911 and I got to take them to the hospital. No. There's a lot between a thought and an action. There's a lot in between there. And there's a lot of intervention, support, but you asking the question, you listening and being that support, that saves lives. I do a whole suicide prevention training, so if you want that.
So just to follow up on what you said, a lot of people fear that it's like planting a seed if you ask about suicide. That is a total myth. And what we most often find is that people who are having thoughts of suicide have been having those thoughts for a while. And what a burden to bear. Who wants to carry that secret around, right? That is such a heavy thing to carry. And so when you ask someone if they're having thoughts of suicide, they most often feel really relieved that somebody's finally noticing, that someone is finally reaching out to them and offering that support. So just be mindful of that. I think we are so familiar. You had mentioned like the difference between physical health and mental health. you know what it looks like when somebody's getting sick, right? When somebody's exhibiting the symptoms of a cold or the flu or something like that. And now we're probably all a little more conscientious of that with everything with COVID over the past couple of years. But we don't always recognize, and it's not common knowledge, what it looks like when someone's struggling with a significant mental health concern, right? Or if we see it, we're too uncomfortable to ask about it. If I see someone, or for example, if you see someone who is coughing and looks pale and they look faint, what do we say? Can I get you something? Do you need me to call an ambulance? Are you feeling okay? If you see somebody you don't know who's crying and they seem upset and depressed, how likely are you to go up to that person and say, hey, it looks like you're going through a lot right now. What can I do for you? Right? We're so much more comfortable asking people who are struggling with physical health versus problems with mental health. So that's another thing I think that prevents people from getting treatment and getting the help, is just that discomfort.
Awesome. So I want to keep us moving here. We don't have a ton of time left, but I do want to touch on one piece that we talked about a little bit, but because we are in a United Methodist Church, in a Christian church, I do want to pull in the topic of faith and spirituality to our conversation here. I know this is a community conversation, but and it's not a Christian conversation, but I think that talking about faith and spirituality and the role that not just one's Christian faith, but spirituality in general. Maybe that's someone else's Muslim or Jewish faith or whatever that might be. How does faith or spirituality play a role in the state of one's mental health? How might it help, or how might it hinder?
I see it as essential. I have done counseling in Christian settings and not, you can do it, but it's so much easier in a Christian setting because you can understand what people's theology, you can start to ask them about their faith tradition, because we've all had some faith training, and based upon that training, we make life decisions, and so it's just to start here what kinds of experiences folks are having with the church. And then as they start to unravel some of the things that are going on, then I can ask them about their understanding of God, and maybe they can give me 3 adjectives about God, and then we can even get into what does your theology teach you about forgiveness, because forgiveness becomes a huge piece in the healing process, to really be able to give up what you have been carrying and have felt ashamed of and are afraid of, and to be able to help walk folks through that and to experience God's grace in the midst of their pain and their sorrow, and just to encourage the loved ones around them that they've done nothing wrong and that God loves all of us. And so to me, the spiritual piece and the spiritual part of the journey is encouraging to folks.
And I think this kind of goes back to what Will said before, when it's so hard to put a finger on this. And when you bring a group of folks together into a room, regardless of what their spirituality is, it's an anchor for them. You can see the group coming together because they're hurting. The outside world's telling them that they're enabling, right? You're enabling. But inside, they're hurting. And we look at them, we talk about that. So as we come together, you can see a spiritual bond. Some Christian, some Catholic, some Muslim, whatever. But they talk afterwards, and you can just see it happening. And it's glorious. It's amazing to watch them lean in and lean on each other and come together week in, week out. And that whole enabling thing starts to be eased by the group able to talk about it and be able to express their faith, and whatever that faith may be, you can tell it becomes a very, very good life support for them. So it is very much a part of what we do with NAMI.
No. I was just thinking.
Okay.
No, you're good.
Well, prayer is essential, I think, also. I will pray with my client. I give them the option if they want me to. It's up to them. I don't push that unless they ask for it. But prayer is so healing in and of itself. I think, too, when we're in the throes, and for me personally, I know when I've been physically ill or emotionally distraught, it's hard for me to pray. Or if I am praying, it's hard for me to really feel God. It's like, where are you, Lord? Are you out there? Can you hear me? Are you listening? Do you care? And so, and this is why I believe intercessory prayer is so important, because we have a real hard time praying for ourselves, but as a body of Christ, we can pray together for another. And I do believe God honors those prayers. I think as a body, we have to be careful, though, that if we are entrusted with a prayer request, that we keep that quiet and to ourselves unless we have permission to take it somewhere else. Because sometimes one barrier I think we have had in churches is sometimes the prayer circle becomes the gossip circle, and people become afraid to share what's really happening in their home life because they feel like they've got to keep that happy, good face on all the time. And we need to be more gracious with each other and more transparent and keeping confidences.
So I'll say just for some specificity, clarity, not clarity, but just added. We do know research tells us that spirituality, cultural religious beliefs that are supportive and affirming and provide that compassion, support, non-judgmental. So whether it's cultural beliefs, spirituality, religion, we know that's a protective factor. But as we've talked about earlier, there certainly could be cultural beliefs, religion, other things, conditioning brought down generation to generation that could be very negatively impact people as far as how their identity is developed, what they're told, that they're bad, they're wrong, they're sinful, obviously things like that. So it can go either way. But as far as being a protective factor, we do know that when it's in that realm of supporting and connection and compassion and non-judgmental and whatever that looks like, it is a protective factor.
Yeah, and that's what I meant when I said earlier about moving away from Facebook to Gracebook. It wasn't a crack on social media. Facebook has a great place in a lot of folks' lives, but when we bring a group of folks together, regardless of whatever their spirituality is, you can see them letting down that guard. Very quickly, in a short amount of time, they look at this and they realize that mental illness is real. It's affected their families, their extended families. They've been judged by society. And within the group of people, you can just see that spirituality really does replace Facebook and becomes Gracebook. It's amazing.
As you said with Grace, I really try to encourage folks to put on that attitude of gratitude, and that as they're going to bed at night or when they first wake up in the morning, just thanking God for just that our eyes are open, we have breath, our feet are touching the floor, that we can walk, we can talk, we can just get about our day. And at the end of the day, just again giving gratitude for all that whom we've met and all whom we've been able to share our lives together with.
And not to keep going on that too, but one of the things we do talk about within Family to Family, without a doubt, you can see folks when they are able to do that, when journaling becomes a part of their life, how it changes their perspective as well. Because remember, society, as I said before, mental illness, where we're at today, and it's changing. I mean, we're here. This is amazing. Mental illness is viewed as the word crazy. Again, I asked about the how, when you think about physical health versus mental health. So the whole idea that we come into this, just talking about this and just being together, makes folks have an ease of mind. They're part of society. As we say, when families come together, we're not going to give you a pill or an elixir to give your loved one. It's not going to happen. But what you're going to do is you're going to change. And you're going to change with them. You're going to learn to accept that mental illness for what it is. Mental illness, and you said it before, Will, that you can't see it. It's not a broken bone. It's not anything like that. So when you tell somebody you got cancer or diabetes, they're going to bring you a gift card. They're ready to have all the empathy in the world for you. You say you got mental illness. So all of that does take a completely different position with faith.
Just following up on all of that, I think one of the most important factors in faith in general is that it is a really good source for hope. So hope, if you can kind of conceptualize hope as this notion of no matter how difficult things are, no matter how awful things are, what you're experiencing, things will eventually get better. And I think faith plays a really important role in that for a lot of people. In my role with the school district, that's not something I can talk about, and with kids, and I don't really see that many kids clinically these days. I do more in the way of supervision. But hope is really powerful. Holding on to hope is one of the biggest predictive factors in terms of preventing suicide. If people hold on to that notion that things can get better and that they will get better, they don't feel that urge to escape and to make things stop as much. So I think faith can play a really important role in that. And then even outside of faith, you were talking a lot about community and connectedness, religion, being connected to a church, youth groups for kids, adult groups, Bible studies. You're connecting people, and that human connection is really important and really powerful, especially for some people who might be feeling really alone.
And I would add one of the advantages of this church and others in the United Methodist Church, that there are Stevens ministers, which is a lay ministry of folks who are taught, who have gone through an extensive program on how to listen to people's concerns, to offer empathy, just to be there. And they're a resource other than, say, the pastor or a therapist. So they can walk alongside of you and offer you the kind of care and compassion that you need as you're getting better. So
Wonderful. Thank you all. I think you touched on exactly what I wanted you to touch on. Let me talk about a couple things, and then I want to move into next steps. So in regard to Stephen Ministries, Stephanie, we do have information for those in the room over on our table tonight that you can pick up about Stephen Ministry and how to get connected with Stephen Ministry here in this church. But in the resources that I share later this week, for those of you tuning in online and for those of you in the room, I will also include information about our Stephen Ministry here at the church and Stephen Ministry in general as well. And then Will, that concept of hope is so critical. I was hoping you would touch on that because if we don't have hope, what do we have? And I think that's something that we can all cling to regardless of our faith tradition or cultural tradition. So I think that's a huge guiding point for us. So I want to continue that conversation and talk about what can organizations like Milford First United Methodist Church, like Milford School District, places where we gather, senior centers, what can community organizations do? Hopefully in this church is just the starting point of a broader initiative and interactions around this topic. What can community organizations like churches do to support individuals struggling with mental health?
I think for one, having referral sources, so places to refer people to when they're struggling. I think maybe putting it out there at the, for example, in a church, on Sunday or whenever people attend service, at the end, just reminding people that there are people who care about them and that you can assist them in getting connected to services and supports. And even in the interim, being there as a support to talk with people. And again, it's, being a therapist, I think you guys would agree that it's not often about what we say, it's just the fact that you're listening to people and you know how to listen. So much of, like, even in my time in graduate school, yes, there's a lot of assessment and advanced assessment and diagnosis, but a lot of it is learning to listen. I mean, we had to be trained to just sit in silence because it's so uncomfortable for the average person to just sit silently with a person while that person is crying. We feel this need to interject and to say something, and it's like they don't need you to say something, they just need you to be present with them. And so I think community organizations can assist with the process of destigmatization and increasing help-seeking behavior just by putting it out there that, hey, folks, this stuff is as common as any physical health condition, as asthma or diabetes or heart disease, anything like that. It's just, again, making it safe to talk about those things, putting resources out there, and for local community organizations to have avenues to refer people to, so private practices and mental health agencies, et cetera.
I'm glad you mentioned diabetes because I have so many folks who come into my office, and if I think that they're at that point where medication might be a conversation, people get very nervous about it, and I take it very seriously. But I remind folks that if you had diabetes, you would get on your medication and you would take your medication because it's helping you. And sometimes folks do need medication. It might not be forever, but for some folks it might be forever. But there's no shame in that. There's not, you haven't failed somehow. It's not, but there is a stigma, unfortunately, about folks being on medication. And I hope people will realize that if I have an illness, diabetes or whatever, I would take what I need to take care of myself.
Just to piggyback off of what you said, I think churches and other organizations can be more tangible in their support too, and offer things like rides to doctor's appointments, or even food or help like cleaning a house. People that have really significant depression and can't get out of bed are going to need support just with basic daily living, and have an outreach team that can help with those kinds of things besides referrals, but that can actually go and physically help people do things they can't do.
I think that's huge, and thank you for touching on that point, because I think our conversation, just by the nature of who we are and the work we do, has focused a lot on young people tonight, but I know we have a multi-generational group with us here in the room tonight and also tuning in online, and then this church is very intergenerational as well, and so particularly for an older population that might not that might be isolated at home, the depression could be exacerbated by that. So being on the lookout for your friends who are older, or family members who are older, being able to support them through whatever they're going through, I think is something that maybe we could talk about.
So in relation to that, one of the artifacts, for better or for worse, of COVID is there are more therapists out there in private practice offering telehealth sessions than I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, even when we first shut down at the school level in 2020, we switched everything over to telehealth. So, for people who are at home, for older adults or people who may have issues with transportation, people who are financially not able to obtain that type of transportation, telehealth is really probably more available now than it ever has been. So that is something positive, I think.
And what Becky was saying is, with that, then we do want to look at those different populations that don't either have the access, or in areas that they aren't getting the internet connections, and so we have to be a little more creative and problem solve that, or just even getting help of how do I get on this thing, and what do I need to do this, because there's a lot to it, and I think there's people that take that for granted, and then there's other people that really, it's like they can't, right? It's not that they can't, it's that it's very different for them. And so we don't want to just act like everybody, it is a resource, but we also with that want to then offer that support and that practical logistical support to get them started, to help them, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, and I would say too that, which back to besides Stephen Ministries, one of the things that this church does is they actually allow us, provide NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness, an opportunity to hold family-to-family sessions here. I think we've had
A lot.
6 or 7 here. Can't remember how many.
I don't know.
But I would encourage you, based on the attendance tonight, to even think about attending a session for NAMI. And the reason why I say that, when you ask what we can do, it's become more educated. Let's take the fear out of this. Let's normalize this. Let's talk about this more. Because hope is indeed what every one of our loved ones are looking for, that the mental health community is looking for. And let's provide that platform. Let's take that first step. Let's be courageous enough to do that together.
Fantastic. Thank you all. I think I want to move to questions. I want to keep us right around an hour, so we have about 5 to 10 minutes left. But I would like to look at the room if we have any questions. Ethan, do we have any questions online? No? Okay. So if you are tuning in online and you want to chime in still, please post your questions in the comments section on Facebook, and we will take that in the next couple of minutes. But those of you in the room, if you have a question, I will come to you with the microphone.
We talked a little bit, or you talked a little bit earlier about adults listening to their children that are struggling with mental illness or mental health. Do you have any recommendations for how to talk to children about maybe a parent that is struggling with mental health and what that looks like, what age that's appropriate, what avenues that might take? You know, because say you have a depressed parent at home or somebody going through something like that, how is that healthfully conveyed to their children?
So that's a really good question. And I think any time is okay to talk to kids about it, just like we would about physical health or physical illness. I think the language we use varies based upon age. So if a parent is having thoughts of suicide, that may not be something we want to tell the child, because that could lead the child to feel really overwhelmed and really afraid. But I think it's okay, depending upon the age of the child. You know, if it's a younger kid, you could say, you know, well, sometimes dad just doesn't feel well and he has really big feelings, and sometimes he just feels really sad. And he's working with a doctor to figure out why he feels sad. You know, he has some things going on at work, he feels really stressed, and we're gonna do what we need to do to take care of those things. So I think communicating that in a way a child can understand it, but also explaining that we are doing something about it can kind of take some of that fear out of it.
I think it's also really important to let kids know that it's not their fault, and that these are big problems that big people take care of, and that they don't have to worry about it, that they can have their regular lives, and that the adults will take care of whatever's going to happen.
And just to summarize is sometimes the inclination is to keep it quiet, and kids are smart. And kids, very young kids, they pick up on things, and they're actually more attuned to the nonverbal. They're more attuned to those, nuances. So you do want to be developmentally appropriate and speak to kind of what Will said as some suggestions. Also, as Becky said, it's not their fault, because they will make something up. They will put a story to it if you don't. And you also don't want to, or you want to steer away from making false promises or saying things, that you can't follow through on or that you don't know about. So just kind of taking it step by step and being honest and communicate, but developmentally appropriate.
Thank you all. I think I saw a hand over here.
So my son wrote his first suicide note when he was 6, but that's a whole nother. But it took me almost a year. You were talking about barriers. It took me almost a year to have him diagnosed through Children's. We had to have, a first meeting with an assessment to see if we even really needed the actual assessment. And then we came back for the assessment. Then we had to come back, and then, so we're through with there. And then we did the psychologist at Children's Hospital for a couple years, and they were just, you didn't say anything today. And that's all we got. We got nowhere. We switched to Child Focus at the beginning of this year. And it's been amazing. We see Tanya White every Thursday. I love her. We worked with Mr. Minderman at Pattison and I was devastated when he gave me the email last year that he was leaving Pattison. I was so sad. But Mrs. O'Brien she's been stellar, and I've pushed all year, so we finally got him approved for an IEP as of last Thursday for emotional disturbance. And like you said, they're not violent, they don't have behavioral issues, but yeah. Oh, my question. So, NAMI is joining, you guys are joining Milford Schools and NAMI. So what is that going to look like as far as kids that see a child focus person every week? Because he sees in school child focus Molly Hampton, and then he sees Tanya White outside. So what is that going to look like for our children and families? So
NAMI doesn't, at least to my knowledge, provide clinical mental health services, right? So what I'm interested in having at Milford Schools, and probably more at the high school to start, is the Breaking the Silence program, or Ending the Silence, which he can probably tell you a little more about, but it's where a person who has struggled with mental health or mental illness and has recovered from that, and or a family member who has lived with someone who has struggled with significant mental illness comes in and talks about their experiences and normalizes that and talks about, the resources that are out there and the help. So it wouldn't be anything that would interfere with any of the clinical services that kids receive with Child Focus currently, or Best Point Children's Home, or our own
Well, no,
mental
I
health
was just seeing if
providers.
it was going to be, I know he's like 4th grade, but I didn't know if it was going to be something like that provided like an extra resource, or, made them, the little kids, even educated a little more to know that it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, not currently. So we'll probably try it out at the high school first.
Okay.
Just because that age group is a little easier to work with and to navigate with the schedule. But do you guys offer youth programs like that for elementary schools too?
It's being talked about. So back to the point of, as Will said, it's called Ending the Silence. And NAMI, I would say, and I was talking about this with Will earlier, I would say we've been to 6 or 7 high schools already this year. Some elementary schools, mostly high schools, Loveland, Mason. And it truly is, to get out there and talk with the children, the kids in those classes, and as Will said earlier too, it's all about eliminating the stigma. It's breaking down these walls and not allowing this to become a weapon, but to actually become something to help heal. So, talking about hope and the fact that you go to someone and you ask them if they're okay. Well, you know what? It is okay not to be okay. And that's what this is all about. So it's going there, and it's a great program. NAMI puts it on. I'm so blessed to be a part of it. And they go around to the high schools, and they have another one, because this is also a fear, is local police forces. And NAMI does a great job of going and meeting with those folks, and it's called CIT, Crisis Intervention Training. Because you can only imagine, and Becky knows this firsthand as well, you get out there, when trauma hits these kids or older teenagers or whatever, their world comes apart, and sometimes through bipolar or whatever, they may get manic. They may be raging, they may be whatever, but we have to understand the underlying part of that is fear. They don't know what's happening to them. So we've got to keep that in mind, but it's doing what, without a doubt, it's doing what we had talked about here. John said, what can we do more? But this truly is about getting the schools together, Child Focus together, therapists together, getting parents together, great organizations like NAMI together. Make this part of our daily dialogue.
I'd like just to add a little bit about the physiology of trauma and the autonomic nervous system, that when a child has had trauma, or an adult, when humankind has had trauma, our body responds to the trauma. I mean, if you're hanging on a cliff, your thought is, how do I get off this cliff? It's an automatic response of fight, flight, or freeze. And so when we are in a traumatic moment, the cortex shuts down, the limbic system goes off, and so the body responds. So when a child has had trauma in the past and they just experienced something that feels like that, even though it might have been 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, they're responding physiologically to it, which is actually a normal response. So if they're angry and verbally abusive, it's just they're responding to something that happened long ago. It's a trigger, it's a trauma response. After that, after they get through that, then they can start to think about it and be more rational around it, and that can help the trigger. But so we get angry with our kids when they're responding in an aggressive way, but sometimes they can't help it. It's just an automatic response.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Still no questions online, Ethan? Okay. Anybody else in the room have a question for the panel?
Hi, I don't really have a question. I teach suicide prevention for the military and government, so I just wanted to talk about a couple of things that we have done. It seems like we could never get ahead of it. 22 a day. So I know that you guys are talking about kids, but with the active shooter and everything else going on right now, we all need to be battle buddies for one another. You have to get out of your comfort zone, and you have to stop and ask somebody how they're doing. A short story for me, when I was a staff sergeant probably 15 years ago, I had a guy that I worked with, and I was so busy that day and I was trying to get out of the office, and he came in the office and he just wasn't acting right. And I just did not have the time to address it. Well, I found out 4 hours later that he had a breakdown. And I said to myself, You're a Bible-believing Christian woman. How did you miss that? So we're going to miss things, and I'm not a psychologist. I get angry with the military because I feel like they put a lot on us to try to help somebody, but I will tell you that I had a guy that worked for me. We intervened. He got off of his meds. He was out trucking. He stopped and was going to take his life, and I called my buddy, and I called his wife, and anything I could think of, don't romance the idea. What about your kids? I mean, whatever you can think of to help them. And I'm here to tell you, he's a success story. So the other thing I want to mention is that we do a lot of resilience training, and it's called Hunt the Good Stuff. And it's exactly what you guys talked about. And my mother, who's a little 81-year-old Bible-believing woman, you have to tell her every day, Mom, you need to think about something positive. Mom, there's got to be something you can grab a hold of. So I think that you're doing a great job, and I think in the days to come, we're all going to need each other. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura. Does anybody have anything to add to Laura's comments?
I'd like to give a suggestion of a book that's outstanding. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, written by Dr. Bissell van der Kolk. He is the first medical doctor to diagnose PTSD in Vietnam veterans, which tells us that through the research that he has done, understanding trauma is really a new science. The way we used to take care of it was just re-traumatizing folks. Now we're looking at what are the symptoms and working through with the symptoms and helping to explain triggering and that kind of thing. That book, I had a former Marine who was hypervigilant. He had security systems all through his house, still slept with a gun under the pillow. Whenever he went out with his wife, he would always check out the restaurant first, and if he either had a gut feeling to stay or invite her to come in, or he would get back in the car. He got that book, and he came back to me, and he had it tabbed and dog-eared, and I mean, he was like, this is my new Bible. I mean, he was really, for the first time, beginning to understand that what he was experiencing was normal and natural for what he'd been through in Vietnam.
And you have so many things that are expected of you, and you're trying to take care of people, and you're all over. My last deployment, we were in 12 countries and 36 locations, and I was responsible for all mail, all people, and all casualty. And the first time I saw that, I said, I can't do this, God. And it took other people coming along, but it just takes a while sometimes to defrag, as we call. So I do go to counseling. I have had some great counselors. I've just been busy. I plan on going back because I want to continue to be healthy. So there isn't any stigma to it. If you need help, if you think you need help, if you think somebody needs help, let's all support each other. So.
Alrighty, thanks again, Laura. Thank you all. I want to thank our panel. I think this has been a fantastic discussion. I hope those of you tuning in online got a lot out of tonight's discussion as well from wherever you are. I hope that this is just the starting point, like I said, of this conversation here in this church at Milford First, but also out in the community in Milford and Greater Cincinnati and whatever community spaces you gather in. So I hope this conversation does not just stay in Mental Health Month, but continues wherever you go next. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for tuning in online. Let's give our panelists a round of applause and thank them for being here. As I said, later this week, we will share resources about each of these organizations on our social media pages and resources about how you can take steps towards mental health and wellness as well. So look for that coming out later this week. So thank you all for being here tonight. Oh yes, and the table by the door, for those of you in the room, there is an informational table, so please pick up what you need as you leave tonight.